Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. Happy Monday, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Today, we're going to talk about Venus's upcoming change into the sign of Pisces and what that means. There's some really interesting implications for that. We're going to talk a little bit about Pisces again in general, and also connect it a little bit to the Cancer moon that's coming through today, tomorrow, or early part of this week. And in order to talk about this, I'm also going to show you a recent horary chart that I worked with, which was a question about whether or not a woman's house would flood. She's in a flood zone, and she's wondering if she ought to put her house up on beams or stilts, and wondering if she should do this, wondering if there's any evidence that her house could be flooded in the future. So I did a horary on that actually plays into the Venus symbolism that I want to talk about today. So let's start by taking a look at the real-time clock and getting a feel for what's happening with Venus this week. All right, here it is. So you can see right now in the sky that Venus is in the late degrees of Aquarius, and that's at about 26 and a half degrees as I'm making this on Monday, February 22nd. And in the upcoming days, let's watch what happens. You're going to see Venus is moving into Pisces by February 25th. That is this Thursday. Now, the other thing that's happening, let's take it back here, is that right now, because Venus is within about 8 degrees of the sun, we say that it is combust, which means that Venus is under the pressure and heat and intensity of the sun. Venus's own light is gone in the sky. Venus has been making the change from evening star and is about to be reborn from morning star and is about to be reborn as the evening star. So that transition is in the process of taking place. And when a planet is close to the sun within, let's say, 15 degrees broadly, and then narrow it down to about 8 degrees, it gets more intense. That the planet is said to be burnt up and sort of co-opted or consumed by the sun. It's weakened. You can't see its light in the sky. It disappears for a while. It's in the process of death and rebirth. So these are really important cycles that we can track, and we are going to be tracking Venus's cycle in the upcoming weeks and months, because Venus is about to, through March and into April, go into evening star phase. So at any rate, the reason that this is really unique is that when Venus is under the beams of the sun, Venus stuff can be difficult. Let's just broadly say Venus represents friendships, love, harmony, allegiances, agreement, compromise. Well, those things are all more or less going to be a little bit more challenging when Venus is combust. It's also not a great time, for example, to, maybe perhaps you could get a great deal on used furniture. You could also buy something that's way too expensive, for decor. You could get a haircut that you don't like. I mean, it's just Venus stuff might be a little compromised right now. Whatever way you want to look at that, whether it's something as superficial as, you're a wardrobe purchase for your a piece of clothing, or if it's a relationship, typically combustion is going to be a little bit difficult for Venus. And there's a lot of nuances about how, with regard to a combust Venus and how that can be read in a birth chart and so forth. It's really, and it's not all bad either. There's a lot that can be said about it. But the short version of this is that one of the forms of protection that Venus can receive from combustion is called being in its own chariot. So if Venus goes into Taurus while it's combust, or Libra while it's combust, or Pisces, which is the sign of its exaltation, it receives protection because it is in its own domicile or its own exaltation, as it's going to be by Thursday of this week, the 25th of February. It receives a form of support and bolstering and sort of protection, and it's said to be like a mitigating factor, like a reducing the stress load of Venus. That's really interesting, and a transition that is about to happen. So I want to show you an example of how this can make a difference practically from within my practice, and then give you some ideas about how you may notice it in your own life, because this is it's a neat little learning lesson, I think, for astrologers or students of astrology, and there's some practical takeaway from this as well. So here is a horary that I did called Will My House Flood? Now, I got permission from my client to use her horary, And here's the gist of it. The woman has a piece of property that is in, I don't remember what the levels were, but it's like a level 10 flood zone. Or it's hard to get insurance in such a zone, if at all, because it's so likely to flood, or it does flood every so often or something like that. So she was wondering if she should take action to put her house up on beams, if I understood correctly, or like stilts, basically, in order to protect her home against potential flooding. And she asked a horary question for this. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to take out the outer planets, and we're going to just remove them from our view, because that's how I tend to teach horary without the outer planets at first. Now, we are going to look at the ruler of the fourth house in this horary that was asked. A horary, just for those of you who don't know, is a chart that's cast at the moment that a question is asked. So it's like the birth chart of a question. And then we have techniques that are very, very old that teach us how to assign planetary signifiers and then read the chart and determine an outcome or an answer, arrive at a judgment. So in this case, the ruler of the fourth house is going to represent her property. That's Venus. So she wanted to know, will Venus, is Venus, essentially the property, going to be flooded? And so what we want to look for is any kind of affliction that's coming for Venus. So I'm going to take out everything in the chart now except for Venus and the sun to sort of show you how this judgment came through. So here's Venus and the sun in the question. Now, Venus is about 10 degrees off, which means that Venus is starting to come under the rays or beams of the sun. And that means that Venus progressively is going to become combust, right? So let me just animate this chart now and show you what that's going to look like. So in other words, in a horary chart, if something or someone, if you're inquiring about whether or someone or will recover or get even sicker, or if something bad will happen to a marriage, or like in this case, the property. If the planet is going to go further and further into combustion with the sun, that is one of the telltale signs that that thing, whatever it may be, is about to get damaged or hurt or will become sicker or something like that. So initially I thought, wow, this is not a good sign. We have the symbol of the property falling under the hard, the destructive qualities of the combustion with the sun. And what's so interesting about this is that right as Venus gets closer and closer to the sun changes signs, right? And it enters Pisces, a water sign. Right as it enters Pisces, a water sign, you're going to see Venus's combustion intensify, and it intensifies typically within 8 degrees. So now we're seeing the picture not only of the property being damaged by the sun, but of the property being damaged by the sun as it is in a water sign. So for me, this was like it was sort of startlingly beautiful. Like, wow, that is such a beautiful picture of a piece of property getting damaged by water. You have combustion, which damages, and then as the combustion is perfecting, the sun, who does the damaging, is going to be in a water sign. Now, I thought, okay, so case closed in a sense. Yeah, there's upcoming damage, water damage that we can see here. But then we want to know if there's is there any chance for hope here, or do we see any glimmer of hope for raising it up on stilts? And what's amazing is that what's going to happen as this intensifies is that Venus is going to enter Pisces, where Venus is exalted, which means lifted up. That literal translation in the ancient language of exaltation is lifted on high. And so we have an example of the planet lifting up in the water sign and then being in what we call its own chariot, which is a form of protection from the combustion. So this was one of the more beautiful and eloquent horary charts that I've literally ever done in 10 years. Sometimes they come through like this and it's just so beautiful you can hardly believe it. So to repeat, we have the combustion signifying the potential flood damage, and then we have the damaging planet, the sun, going into the water sign where it's going to do the damage. But then we see Venus going into the sign where she's lifted up and then in her chariot and protected, or its chariot and protected. So that was, again, just a really remarkable horary. And the reason that I wanted to share it is because it illustrates so well what's happening in the sky right now. And what's happening in the sky right now, I'm going to put everything back in. Let's just get it all back in on the screen. I'm going to close this now and bring up the real-time clock again. And let's just reiterate what's happening in the days ahead. Okay, so in the days ahead, Venus is now preparing to enter its own chariot. Venus will enter its chariot in Pisces, where Venus is exalted. So we have, there it is, and that's Thursday of this week on the 25th. So all of this is to say, this week, if you notice any of the following themes, don't be surprised. One would be if you're struggling with Venus things, right? Let's say the Venus thing is something to do with art or beauty or something creative, or if it has to do with sexuality or romance or love or relationships or friendship or general keeping of peace between people. And if that's been a little different or difficult lately, and remember, Venus has just gone through the square to Mars, right? So we have Venus has been in Mars is in Venus's sign. So there's been some conflicted Venus energy in the air. Now, what you're going to see by the later this week is that suddenly the transformational process that's been running through the symbolism of Venus in our lives right now is going to get this big elevated kind of boost and pick me up. You may notice that in terms of things suddenly turning out for the better within a compromised or difficult Venusian situation of some kind. It could be as simple and mundane as, okay, like I see my daughter do this all the time, right? She's making something on the table, and she loves to paint and draw and all sorts of stuff. And she loves crafts. So she's making something and she makes a mistake. And she gets really upset. It's ruined, right? My wife always has a way of helping her be like, well, what if we just did something creative with that? What if that mistake became the platform for a new idea, right? So you take the deviation, you take the random, chaotic, loose end that bothers or that puzzles or that seems to introduce chaos and breaks up peace, or it somehow challenges the harmony that you're seeking or the cohesion aesthetically that you want. And you say, well, what if that just becomes the beginning of some new twist or turn? I heard this once also said by a jazz musician, and I heard this quote somewhere. I think it's fairly famous, which is that, you know, the difference between like a jazz musician and someone who's, you know, maybe more classically trained is that a misstep in, you know, some more tight or restrictive classical practice where you really can't mistake on notes. And no offense against classical music. I love classical music, but that a jazz musician, the mistake becomes the next piece in the improvisational, you know, wizardry. That is not at all what the quote said. I don't remember at all what the quote said, but it was something like that. It was like, you know, a jazz musician, when they hit a wrong note, it's like, no, let me hit that 3 more times and then see where that goes. And my daughter's getting good at that. She's getting really good at when something that she feels like a mistake is coming up, she'll repeat kind of my wife's little mantra about like, well, maybe this means you can do something with that. And I feel like that's the kind of improvisational blessing that we might receive later on in the week. especially by Thursday, and then really that energy stays with us for a while because Venus is going to continue to be in its combustion with the sun for a little ways into March, and still exalted in its chariot in the meantime. So we have an opportunity to avoid the flood, to put the house up on stilts, so to speak, and to receive some benefit from that. And so I just thought everyone would want to know that little segue that Venus is providing us with to make something good out of something bad potentially. And we said as much about Venus, if you guys recall last week, when I said that Venus is in the overcoming position to Mars and that Mars defers to Venus. The next stage in that reasoning is the fact that Venus is combust, but moving into its exaltation and protected in its chariot. So put your metaphorical house up on stilts, or know that the stilt may show up at your door and help you, rise above the flood. I would think that there's going to be some really good turns of fortune this week into next. For example, I think there's quite a few people who are dealing with problems, speaking of housing and flooding and stuff like that down in Texas. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on in the world right now. That's the aftermath also of the Uranus-Saturn square. So watch for some good fortune when Venus gets into Pisces, and specifically the kind of good fortune that has to do with almost like a protective energy that comes around and tends to lift things up. Okay, so that was the first thing I wanted to say. The other thing that I wanted to say today is that we have this really nice energy from Cancer and Pisces simultaneously. So let's take a look at this. It is what we would sometimes refer to as a waxing gibbous. You're going to see the moon here. It's past its first quarter phase, and we're into waxing gibbous phase. It's generally a supportive time of the moon cycle in the next few days. So I like this going along with Venus improving its dignity by Thursday. We're going to see the moon in Cancer between now and essentially Wednesday, and then the next day, Thursday, then we get Venus moving into its exaltation. So it's a nice little sequence of events where there's just a lot of supportive energy in the air this week. And that's coming off from, Mercury also turning direct. And if you look forward just a few days, you're going to see that Mercury is getting going again by the end of the week. And right at the end of the week, as Venus has entered its exaltation, and as the full moon comes through, Mercury is also applying then within 3 degrees to Jupiter, which is also very fortunate. So are the energies of any astrological week perfect? No. And of course, depending on what's happening in your own chart overall, things, for a lot of people are going to be varied. But generally speaking, I like the weather this week. So I just wanted to give you guys something to be hopeful about. And also I wanted to say a few things about this connection between Cancer and Pisces. One of the things that these two signs have in common is it's a little esoteric and psychological, but I think you guys will enjoy this. They have in common the theme of memory. There's a lot of memorializing and remembering. There's nostalgia and almost like a daydreaming that comes in with both of these signs. And I want to explain why, and then just say a few things about that sort of philosophically. So let's just start with the seasonal metaphor of Pisces. And it is a metaphor because this metaphor is applicable to us no matter what time of year it is. This metaphor could be applicable within a 24-hour day, what to speak of a solar year and how one might be oriented to that solar year depending on where on the globe you live, right? So just take this as a metaphor. So Pisces season, we're going to start with Pisces. Pisces season, as I mentioned last week in a video I did on the meaning of the sun in Pisces, happens as the light is about to return but has not yet taken over. It happens at the equinox, the spring equinox from the northern hemisphere standpoint. So you have this kind of gestation within the darkness. It's a Jupiter-ruled sign. It's moving toward the restoration of light. And that but it's not there yet. So it's kind of angsty and moving toward that feeling of restoration, renewal. It's a faithful sign, but sometimes tortured by the feeling that we're not where we're supposed to be. So there's this kind of divine discontent and longing. And you find that that is used by the Piscean personality type, let's say, often in really, really beautiful ways. Compassion, empathy, dreaming, mysticism, imagination, romance. This is the sign of Venus's exaltation, and this is Jupiter's watery feminine or yin sign. So there's a lot of that very the longing can infuse one with an emotional sense of, oh, I've got an emotional crusade that I'm on, right? There's an emotional sense of righteousness, and there's also sometimes on the opposite side you're going to be tortured by your own sense of discontent, nothing ever being good enough, or the wound never being healed, or the light never quite being there. It's like a knight that's the Knight of Cups, for example, in the tarot deck, if you know that card. There's a sense of romantic dissatisfaction that is the absolute most beautiful thing about Pisces, as well as sometimes the most tragic thing. It just depends on if it's driving us or if we also have the reins, so to speak. Now, one of the things that is interesting about Pisces is that this is the exaltation of Venus. So Venusian qualities get exalted in this sign. That's where that's why we have such an affiliation with the romance and the return of light and the return of spring and Venus, that longing and that beauty. Venus is very happy and content to long for something that is not had. In fact, Venus as a goddess really can't be possessed. If you look back at Aphrodite in the Greek tradition, Aphrodite is married to someone that she really doesn't want to be with, because otherwise all of the other gods are kind of coveting and jealous and so forth. And so she's put into a marriage that's not really ideal for her. And of course, she ends up having this sort of illicit love affair with Ares, or Mars. And so Venus can't be kept or held or possessed, and yet everyone desires to possess Venus. And there's a teaching in there about Venusian things, that Venus is at its best in some ways, like as in Tantra, when desire and longing for some unfulfilled state is the enjoyment itself, that we learn how to relish the feeling of longing rather than rushing toward or mistakenly thinking that the satisfaction of our senses will ultimately please us. So that's why Venus is so exalted in Pisces. It's got this almost, like Robert Schmidt once said, that exaltation is like, when someone's playing on the violin and they get up to that highest point, and it's so taut and it's so bright and high, and like that. It's like Venus is being played so high and so tight, and it feels like it could explode, but it doesn't. It just holds there, and in that sense, it's just overflowing with this kind of Venusian romanticism. So this is also the depression of Mercury, because when you put Mercury into that state that we're describing, it just loses a lot of the normal, Hermes-like qualities, which are going to tend to be more mental, rational, linguistic, communicative, logical. Now, that's not to say that Mercury is a dry intellect, because that's not Mercury Hermes at all, but it is to say that Mercury will just in some ways lose itself, right? There's a lot more that could be said about Mercury and Pisces, but just so you get the tension of what Pisces includes for the rational mind, for the heart, for the moods, and for the spirit. So within this sign, there's a longing, there's a daydreaming. And why call it daydreaming? Because we're dreaming of the coming of the power of light, that we're daydreaming. We're looking forward at the takeover of light and dreaming toward it. And it's a kind of, the reason that it's a form of remembering is because this is a circle. We've been here before. We're longing for something we've already had, we've already tasted, we've already known, but somehow we've lost touch with. So that's why there's the symbol of Pisces is also those two fish with the upward and eastward moving fish and the downward and westward moving fish. We've been here before, right? We've gone through the whole circle. We've descended into a body before, and we've ascended. We know that we're spirit souls as well, and so that longing, that daydreaming, that's a forward looking form of memory. It's tricky because it almost seems like it's idealistic and future oriented, and it is in a sense, but because we're talking about a great circle of the alternation of light and dark, we're also talking about a form of nostalgia for the light. And that is so attractive. That's so, I mean, so many of the poets and musicians and filmmakers and people that we love, or people that help us remember that we all come from a common source, and that compassion comes from that. That's a form of remembrance as well. Now, what's interesting about Cancer, which, remember, for the next couple of days, we have the moon trining the sun in Pisces while the moon is in the sign of Cancer, another water sign. Water signs have a lot to do with memory overall. Scorpio too, but I won't get into that one today. Cancer has another approach to memory, and it's very different. It tends to be backward looking. And the reason for that is that where does Cancer come? Cancer comes at the moment where the gaining of the light has reached its peak. And is zenith the right word? I think zenith is the right word. And then it starts coming down, and the days grow shorter. Now, again, metaphorical, because any of these things can happen in any season of the year. Does not matter. These are archetypal. So the sun coming down, right, in the solar year, the light is starting to decrease or decline. That's funny for the beginning of summer, isn't it? But the beginning of summer there's this weird built-in nostalgia that happens with the beginning of the summer in terms of the alternation of light and dark. We start this time of year that's arguably the lightest and the most associated with light, and yet that summer season is also defined by the gradual dissolution of light. Every day of summer, the light is waning. So there's a really beautiful teaching in there about light and about memory. So if you think about Cancer ruled by the moon, this is also Jupiter's exaltation, and it's the fall of Mars. We'll talk about those things in a second, but the Cancerian archetype that we usually hear about is mothers and children. And there's a lot of good associations. Sometimes that's just going to be a beat up stereotype for Cancers. But the one reason that the moon and mother metaphor is so good for Cancer is because a mother is defined in the trajectory of a mother is defined by a gestation that happens within, where there's a union. There's a kind of at oneness between the child and the mother. Not saying anything anybody probably doesn't know, right? But then the child comes out into the world and individuates, separates from the mother, takes on its own form, its own shape apart from the mother. And in those early stages, it can't do that alone. It still relies on the mother for breast milk. It's going to rely on the environment, whether the environment is a mother or even a father. It's that you rely on the source from which you came, a parental figure, or the mother itself, because you're not fully capable of being independent yet. And so the need to stay closely connected to the source as one is separating from it is part and parcel of the sign of the zodiac that the moon rules. And that's what's happening with the light. The light is coming down in the year. We're departing from the brightest, lightest place, which could be visually understood as the source, the summer solstice, the peak of light, closest to the pole star that the sun will be. And then it's coming down. We're separating from that highest light, from that source. We're descending spirit into matter. And so the mother's job is to constantly be, okay, where am I? Where am I? Where am I? A child looks around, they're looking for their mother because that's their orientation point. So the Cancerian archetype has memory built into it, both in terms of the light and the gradual separation from the light, but the need to remain closely bonded or yoked to it in remembrance, in devotion, in care, in nurturance, in emotional proximity. And also in terms Cancer, in terms of the mother and the moon archetypes connected with Cancer, those are all part and parcel again of what's happening astronomically. Okay, so when you think of Cancer, Cancer also has romance built into it. Cancer, the moon, sort of like the moon child, but it's different than Pisces, whereas Pisces tends to have that daydreaming quality. Has almost more of a forward longing towards something that can't be obtained, but it's also being remembered. Cancer has the sense of remembering something that once was, that's very close at hand, that we need close to us to remember that we're separating from, and that we still have to remain proximally close to. If you want to think about it like this, the reason that these themes are so important spiritually is because in everyday life, as we live our spiritual lives and try to stay in our spiritual center, we are plagued by forgetfulness. And we have to learn how to spiritualize the dance between remembering and forgetting. So in the Bhagavad Gita, in the, let's see, this is chapter 15, text 15. Let's see. Here it is. I am seated in everyone's heart. This is Krishna speaking. And from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. And so, isn't it funny? I mean, just think about this. Isn't it funny how, and I'm thinking about this a lot as I've returned to Minnesota, which is where I grew up last summer. So I went through fall, and then we're in this deep, long winter, and it's the first time that I've been back in like a deep, long winter for a while. And I was thinking also about what people in Texas are going through, where they're having the worst winter storm in whatever decades and decades. I don't know how long it's been. I think like 100 years or something like that. So it's been a really long time anyway. And I was just thinking, I heard someone on, it was like social media, who was showing a picture in Texas, and they were saying that they grew up in the Midwest. I think it was, I want to say it was like maybe Iowa or something like that. But anyway, and they were saying it's been so long since I've really deeply remembered winter. And I was just thinking about that. And then I was thinking about the seasons and so forth. And then this verse came into my mind. And it's so, and then being in the deep winter here, there's two different functions that memory is always playing for us. One feels like it's looking forward towards something that we long for, but we've had before. We long for it because we've had it before and we've lost it somehow. And then there's a memory that has to do with departing. We've received something, we've remembered something, and then there's a gradual when you remember something, the longing goes away. It's like, oh, now I'm close to the thing that I've longed for. I have it. And then we can almost forget what we have, right? And then the cycle starts over. We long for what we forgot. Okay, so let's think about this seasonally. You can be in this state, I would call it like fall or autumnal or winter consciousness. And it doesn't have to be literally tied to the seasons. This could be any day of your life. And you remember the darkness. You have this moment where the darkness is coming back and you go, oh yeah, wow. I was enjoying the light. I was completely absorbed in the happiness, let's say, of the light. And I fell asleep in it, right? I fell asleep in some kind of sunny summer, spring, like bliss. And the darkness starts coming back and it causes you to remember what you had. It causes you to remember where you came from. And there's like a fall or an autumnal or winter nostalgia. You go, the dark is coming back, and the dark serves to remind me of what I had that I was taking for granted, or I was kind of blissfully unaware of. And so the dark always has this way of reminding us about what we have. If you lose someone, you go, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. Some hair band sang that song, right? So the darkness is always awakening us and reminding us of our source, of our spirit soul, and of communion with God. But then what happens is, darkness can take over. Darkness can completely absorb us, and we can forget again. Like, you get into the deep winter here in Minnesota, and it's like I can't really remember what spring or summer feels like. This is one of my favorite things about living in Minnesota, actually, even though I know for some people that's going to sound crazy, but I love the fact that the winter is so deep and frozen here that I literally can't remember spring or summer. It's like I fall asleep in it. It's so dark. And, you tend to kind of stay up late and you make fires and you go into a very deep yin state is what I would call it. It's not at all bad. It could be. I mean, the darkness certainly could represent madness or being completely lost or consumed by ignorance or, something like that. So we remember the darkness, first of all, reminds us as it's coming in, oh my God, like I was asleep, I was kind of asleep in the light and the darkness is coming back. And now I remember, like, it doesn't last forever. And we somehow need that, right? And then the darkness can consume us and we can completely forget about the light. And then all of a sudden Pisces season comes around, right? And then we start remembering the light. We start longing for it. The memory of it starts awakening within us. I'm not saying literally Pisces again, just metaphorically speaking. We start remembering the light. It awakens us. But then what happens? Once it returns, we are consumed by it. We take it for granted and we forget that we're in the very thing that we longed for. And then again, we start separating from it. The darkness starts coming back. And our task, spiritually speaking, is to spiritualize this whole process because it's always happening. We're always in the process of remembering and forgetting. Why else here's a avatar of God saying, I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness, as if they're connected in a circular flow with one another. We see that, and so how does one spiritualize that? We spiritualize that by every day practicing the art of remembrance, because then we're not tossed back and forth by remembering and forgetting. Every day we recognize that remembering and forgetting, spiritually speaking, become the stuff of intimacy, right? There's a way in which we're helpless before the powers of darkness, of sleep, of heaviness, of forgetfulness. But if we daily have a spiritual practice where we say, I'm remembering my spirit soul, I'm remembering love, I'm remembering other people, I'm remembering service, I'm remembering becoming the better version of myself, I'm remembering sweetness, right? If we're doing that every day, then it's a lot harder for the process of forgetting and remembering to be one that tosses us back and forth. And that's when we tend to go to extremes, right? When it tosses us around, that's when we say, oh, I need a 30-day cleanse. And oh my God, I need salvation. I need to fall down on my knees and scream to the sky and say, why have you forsaken me? And where have I gone? And what's happened? And wring my hands. And, we do that, emotionally speaking, in small ways all the time because we don't have daily practices of remembrance. We don't have ways of daily recognizing, I tend to forget. It's okay. Now I'm taking time to remember. When that happens, then there's going to be times in our life where we're living through seasons where it's very dark. But even in that darkness, even though on an almost like an outer covering level, it feels like the light is gone, we have it within because we're remembering it every day. And there's going to be seasons of light where it's really, really light, but we don't forget the darkness. We stay humble because we know that darkness will come back around. And so we're always staying in a practice of remembrance. And remembrance is not just of the light. Remembrance is both of the light and the dark. So anyway, I wanted to share that because it strikes me as a good thing to recall right now as the power of that Piscean energy that's about to power through in the next month is it tends to play on this dynamic. And one of the worst things that I see people do when Pisces season comes through is get into some kind of wishful ideation about the future and everything that will solve it. Well, again, if we follow this out, if you project into the future about something that you hope that you'll get that will make it all perfect and better, you'll get there, you'll fall asleep in it, and then darkness will come and you'll go, man, I didn't even know what I had. And round we go. Right. So in some ways, those storylines are inevitable. So how can we stay awake and in remembrance within them? So we don't have to live our lives tossed by these huge extremes. I don't want to go on a 40-day cleanse every spring and try to get some kind of beach body because I binge during the winter. Do you know what I mean? That's a simple example, but spiritually speaking, it's the same thing. I don't want to keep going through periods where, long stretches of my life are covered over by ignorance and forgetfulness and self-indulgence and, my worst qualities taking the wheel, only to then have to do some kind of rocky, heroic resurrection quest, run up a million stairs and pump my hands that I reach the top. No, I'm going to try to remember that I fail and forget every day and remember that I'm redeemed every day. And I do that by entering into sadhana or spiritual practice where I can see that I forget, I can see how I forget, and I can remember all in one practice. In an hour, I can sit down one day, every day for 1 hour and do that and forget and remember all at the same time. And that's how every day God becomes more real in my heart because I go, God is seated in my heart, and from God comes remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. God is not just in my knowledge. God is not just in my remembrance. God is also there in my forgetfulness. That's very relieving. You know what I mean? And it's just like my daughter sitting at the table, and my wife says, that looks like a mistake, but if you take some time and get creative with it, you can turn that and it can become the source of something new and creative and interesting. So that's how are we able to make that maneuver? Only if we regularly process, only if we regularly experience the process of remembering and forgetting our very own heart, right? If we take time to observe that process within ourselves every day, it's a lot easier to become adaptable and fluid with life. That's what these water signs point to. Is a lot of it has to do with the process of remembering and adaptation. And the only thing that tends to make these signs go in the direction of completely, uncontrolled, emotional problems and so forth is when, rather than recognizing the deep teaching of these great cycles, we get captured by them and then we get thrown about because they're big waves. They're big. I mean, it's not like just little stream running down the street, from a light rain. These, Pisces, Cancer, there's a big water. So how to not get tossed about by it? Enter in and get tossed about by it daily in a small way that you have some participatory control over. That's what sadhana is. That's what practice is. So just a deeper thing that was on my mind today. I hope you find this interesting and valuable for your own daily experience. And in the next few days, as the moon cycle in you have a waxing gibbous moon right now, trine from a moon in Cancer to Pisces. It is a great time to go, what have I really forgotten? Right? And where do I need to gather up my sense of devotional remembrance in my life and participate in these cycles and care for them, tend to them, nurture these cycles within myself day by day. The next couple of days, I think, are really good for restoration, emotional wholeness. And by the end of the week on Thursday, Venus really starts to lift us up and help us start to repair from some flood damage. So I hope that you guys are, again, having a good start to your week today. I hope that this adds to your good start to the week. I always love hanging out with you guys. Tell me your story. What's going on with you guys right now? I'd love to hear from you guys and hear about your connection to either the archetype of Cancer or Pisces or an exalted Venus in Pisces. That would be fun. I know I was going to talk about Jupiter and Mars in Cancer, and I kind of forgot. So we'll do that another day. I get on a roll and then sometimes I just lose my script. So All right, that's all I've got. Take care, guys. Have a good day. Bye.